They say if your only tool is a hammer, then every problem becomes a nail. What's up, Internet? Jay here with Nerd Rage Against the Machine. Today I'm going to talk about the idea of using a universal system versus a specific system. This is something a lot of game companies love to do, is to have their own house system, their own one rule system to rule them all. Whether that is GURPS from Steve Jackson, Hero Games has the Hero system, Savage Worlds, and of course Fate as good examples of this. Now, I myself have never been a big proponent of the idea of a one-size-fits-all solution. It's kind of like saying the only tool you'll ever need is a hammer. It's not true. There are simply too many examples of where the right tool for the right job come into play. And that's really where I feel with the universal system. And this is one of the big differences between role-playing games and other types of games. War games like Warhammer, or board games like Settlers of Catan, or even Monopoly or Magic the Gathering are competitive. The idea is that, if you're sitting across from me and we're playing, Shea Geek or Illuminati or Warhammer, Battletech, what have you, ultimately my goal is to win. My goal is to defeat you, even if I'm not the most competitive player. And I'm not. I'm not one of these, tournament level neurotic type players. I'm a much more, let's have fun with it. But I'm still going to screw with my opponents when it's a game like that. Role-playing games are not meant to be competitive. They are about the journey. They are not about who can build the best character. They're not about who can defeat the GM, and nor is it the GM's job to defeat the players. I think that, if you're looking for an immediate bad trait for a player or a GM, it is, the GM who's bragging about how he got his sucker players to not realize that they were dead, or the player who is more interested in what he's gained out of the adventure, points-wise, stats-wise, gold-wise. I killed insert character here, my GM goofed and I killed Darth Vader in my Star Wars campaign. Mwah ha 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 ha. Really, dude? Come on. Saying that, a role-playing game's rule set is very similar to what they call in Hollywood a writer's Bible. If you were, say, to work on a television show, like, say, Firefly or Star Trek, or even, Big Bang Theory, you're given a writer's Bible. And this goes through a lot of the mechanics, a lot of the personalities, who is Captain Jean-Luc Picard, who is Captain Malcolm Reynolds, who is Wash, who is Sheldon. And to give you an idea of how to write for those characters, how to make them interact, and what works and what doesn't. So saying that, that's really what an RPG set is. This is why we don't just, scrap systems altogether and just use a universal flip a coin. Or something similar, which it could be done, just like, a hammer can be used for a lot of things, but doesn't make it the right tool for the right job. And each rule set, even in these universal sets, I've found that there are things that they are better at than others. Savage Worlds, for example, builds characters that are a cut above the average Joe. This is a very good game for pulp adventures. If you're looking for something like Raiders of the Lost Ark or Evil Dead, Savage World is not a bad game. Especially true if you're looking for something that's going to have miniatures. It would be a decent game for a Star Wars campaign. However, and my apologies to Shane Hensley, the author of the game, I find it to be a lousy game for superheroes. I've played the superheroes RPGs with it, and it just is lacking. The hero system, on the other hand, is ideal for superheroes. I mean, it was originally called Champions for a reason. But again, that granularity doesn't lend itself to other systems. I would never want to use this for a comedy RPG or something that's very simple, because it's simply not simple. by any stretch. Fate, on the other hand, is almost the opposite of Savage Worlds. It's very theater of the mind, very well done, but very much a floaty narrative kind of RPG. It has its, and again, it's a good game. Don't get me wrong. I could see many games being useful for this. I would say, maybe something with a lighter, almost more comedic or adventure tone would be perfect for Fate. And GURPS is more like a slightly more real hero system with a little different rules. And these are by no means the only universal systems. A lot of game companies have their house systems. Palladium is a good example. And in fact, with Palladium, and I'll admit right out front, I'm never going to forgive Kevin Simbita for the whole Robotech RPG Tactics fiasco. But before that even, I looked at Rifts and Robotech and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Stranger and all the other Palladium games, and one thing that hit me is how much these games felt like they were cut and paste. Let's take a chunk out of this system, and we need mutant animal rules. Okay, just grab what was in TMNT and slap them into Rifts. In fact, there was even talk that at one point when modern RPGs were becoming a big deal that he was going to release a game called Recon Modern. Well, he already had Ninjas and Super Spies, and I couldn't imagine what he was going to have to, how little work would have to be put into making a modern RPG using the Palladium system when a modern RPG with an Asian flair for the Palladium system already exists. I mean, what are you going to do? Take out the Asia sourcebook material and replace it with Europe? Yay! And this is true with a lot of universal systems. When D&D 3rd Ed came out, everybody and their brother started using D20 for everything. And, the thing is that even replacing other games, let's do Traveler in D20, let's do Star Wars in D20, let's do Legend of the Five Rings in D20. And what I found is that they felt very cookie cutter. I've said it before and I'll say it again, familiarity breeds contempt. And playing, L5R was a great game. The mechanics for that game is what made it work. The idea of how the rings work and how the dice system worked really did evoke the feel of samurai drama in ways that Dungeons and Dragons rules simply can't. Now, saying that, I will admit you can use the same mechanics to an extent if you're willing to mutate them heavily. Mutants and Masterminds uses D20, but it is so different, especially with the later second and third editions, it is so different than orthodox D&D 3.0 as to be unrecognizable for the most part. It doesn't use any dice beyond the 20-sider, for example. The numbers now represent the numbers on the sheet. So if you have a strength of 10, it doesn't mean that you're mediocre like it does in D&D. It means, oh my god, you're amazing, because that's the same as a plus 10 in D&D. Which I think is a smart move. Moving away from and using similar mechanics is fine. I've always respected Chaosium's systems for this. The basic role-playing system is pretty malleable. Call of Cthulhu and RuneQuest use the same system for the most part, meaning that a Cthulhu player should be able to step into an RQ game relatively easily. However, an RQ character is much more hardy, as there's no sanity rules, there's no magic is much easier to deal with, because again, RuneQuest is more fantasy than is Cthulhu. So you have that divide, even though they're using similar mechanics. You still know that you're going to be rolling on the resistance table, or you're going to be how a percentile skill works. That doesn't change. This is also true with Modiphius' 2D20 system. I simply adore Modiphius' system. It's one of the things I will say is probably the closest thing to a universal system I love. But again, it's heavily mutated. They do Star Trek and they do Conan. And I can't imagine two systems that are two worlds that are very different. Conan is very visceral, very very in the weeds, very gritty, whereas Star Trek is much more an intellectualist science fiction. And whilst again, a Conan player stepping into a Star Trek campaign isn't going to have a problem understanding how to roll the dice. The dice work exactly the same, but there are less stats, there are less skills. The equipment system is not the same. There is a set of starship rules that Conan doesn't use. Conan also has an amazing system for for between session carousing, which Star Trek doesn't need, so it doesn't have. But again, the core mechanics stay the same. How I roll a dice stays the same. But the games are wildly different, even to the amount of, like, I would say a Star Trek character has got a greater chance of survival than a Conan character, just by the definition of how those things work. There's no psychological trauma rules in Star Trek, which again are, believe it or not, in Conan. And that's really where, when you're dealing with a universal system, or even any system, the rules should be designed to tailor to that world. That's the whole point of a role-playing game. Saying that, I understand the frustration with learning a different set of rules. My game group, we tend to play a lot of different rules. Right now, I'm running RuneQuest and playing in a Traveler campaign. Thankfully, I'm pretty familiar with Traveler, and I've known RuneQuest for a long time. But, if we were to, say, jump over and start playing Marvel superheroes, or even, Star Wars Force and Destiny, we would have to relearn those rule sets, because they're not as familiar. But again, you gain a lot there too. This also comes to, I think, when you have a player group that's so invested in the system that familiarity not only breeds contempt, but has players kind of ignoring the ability to discover a system. What I mean by this is, sometimes not knowing everything can make a game more fun. A perfect example of this would be World of Darkness. When that game was new, there was so much to explore, so much different about it. Then it got to the point that every player would look at the clans and go, "Oh, you're Toreador, I just got to show you something pretty so that you're going to be distracted. Oh, you're Nosferatu, how can I use the fact that you can't seduce to save your life to my advantage? Oh, you're a Ventru, what's your blood exclusion?" And this is true with the other, werewolf, mage, wraith, changeling, etc. That, when you knew the system, you got so down in the weeds that you knew, you were looking for those weaknesses, you were looking for those things. This is actually one of the reasons I really adored New World of Darkness, which I know was an unpopular opinion. People, oh, it's the worst thing ever because, they took away all the clans. There's only like 5 clans, and then you have bloodlines. But the reason for that was to inject the mystery. If you look at the clans they included, they even made things a lot more vague so that you didn't have those solid examples of, oh, I know what your clan is, here is your weakness on a silver platter, but to make it more obscured, to give you mystery. And that's where, that's one of the reasons they tried to reboot the World of Darkness. The idea with the clans being, again, yes, there's only 5 clans, but you can bloodline yourself into a place that nobody's going to know what you are anyway, so that every vampire can feel a little more fresh. And again, I understand why it failed. People wanted the old stuff. And I do think the new vampire looks great. But again, that's where a different system can create new opportunities as well for players. So I know this is a bit of a long rant, and I know that, not everyone agrees with me, but again, if you have your opinions on whether you prefer universal systems over specifics, or what kind of systems you like, love to hear about it below. So in the meantime, I bid you adieu and happy gaming.